Hello, welcome to the Jenkins Documentation Office Hours. Today is May 1st. Happy May. Around the table right now, we have myself, Kevin Martins, Meg McRoberts, Brigitte Saikia, and Mark Waite. So on the agenda for today, I've got the latest contributor spotlight. We'll check in with Meg about developer experience. See if anything's changed. Sorry, go ahead, Meg.
I haven't gotten to that, so skip it.
Skip that then. Documentation fixes that have recently been implemented or updates. Talk quickly about Java 25 documentation. The community awards, again, the voting for that. Uh, just a highlight for Jan's blog post about redesigning Jenkins once more. The latest version and revamp of Pipeline Graph View. Notes about Google Summer of Code, the Chinese documentation site, and its status. Recent LTS and weekly releases, some other recent updates to Jenkins.io. And then, as we've been carrying the last few sessions, the Alpha Omega documentation potential, plugin developer docs, and Blue Ocean deprecation. We'll address those as we get there, but we have plenty to talk about in the meantime. Is there anything else that we need to add to the agenda or any other topics? Okay. Great. So first things first. So the contributor spotlight, the latest feature is for Sasha Laburi, founder of CloudBees, or one of the founders of CloudBees, and a longtime Jenkins supporter. Really great read there. Lots of interesting insight and stories about the history of both CloudBees, but more so the Jenkins project, how it came to be, his experiences with the breaking from Oracle, and what Sasha believes is really important about open source and supporting open source. So if you have a chance, definitely take a read there. It's a lot of insight, a lot of good stuff there. It was really nice connecting with Sasha to get that from him. And then coming up, we've got Elon Rabinovich, who's one of the chair people for Scale, who's always been a very nice and staunch supporter for Jenkins. So that's great that we get to feature him. Meg's shared her response, which is amazing. We'll be featuring her for a spotlight in the coming months as well. And then we've got some other ones in the pipelines, and we'll have more on that once we get closer to having those put together and publishing those. For the documentation fixes, so there was a recent message in the Jenkins user mailing thread asking why there was no Java 21 upgrade instructions, among other things. So I've gone ahead and added the Java 21 upgrade instructions. They include the video that Darren Pope recorded about upgrading to Java 21 and making sure that everything's aligned on that front. That also it was also a chance for us to update the installation guides as needed for Java 21, the Jenkins file runner tutorial, Docker tutorial, and every other area that might have still been describing something like Java 11 or Java 17 everything's been updated to Java 21 accordingly. So the only remaining mentions of stuff like Java 17 or Java 11 even are in old historical blog posts, previous changelog entries, security advisories, things that would not need to be changed. So we're good with all of that. So thanks to that user for pointing that out in the first place. And great news about that is it's also helping us compile the areas of documentation that will need to be updated for Java 25 once that's part of the Jenkins release and Jenkins build. So on that note, Chris Stern recently created an issue to track some of the Java 25 documentation needs and what she's titled Cookbook. So we have an issue for that to track. Chris, Bruno, and myself, and anyone else in the community that wants to help out will be working on this once it's available as part of Jenkins. Again, it's not even early access yet, as far as I'm aware, so it's not something we'll be updating right away. But once it is part of the weekly release builds, we'll start looking at that. We'll need to make sure things like the Java support is updated to reflect that. But more to come on that. But again, thanks to that user for pointing that out and raising that issue. It helped us find all the missing areas and get that updated accordingly. The 2025 Jenkins Community Awards have been selected. As far as the nominees are concerned, voting's opened up on April 22nd and will go for about a month and close on June 5th. So still plenty of time to vote. Right now, I think Alyssa mentioned earlier that we have about 17 responses so far. So great to get that number already, but we'd love to have more. So if you have a chance, check out the blog post here. Alyssa is going to be putting another blog post together regarding the voting itself. So more information on that will be available later. But the voting is now open. The updated Google form is available here in the blog post. So here under Cast Your Vote, this Google form link takes you to the Jenkins Contributor Awards voting form. And this is where you can fill in your options and choose who you'd like to see win in that category. Um, if there's any concern or confusion around who's eligible, last year's winner can't win the same award this year. So last year's security MVP can't win security MVP this year, but they could win most valuable contributor. The nominations have already been addressed and taken care of in that regard, so there won't be any incidental overlap or anything unexpected in that regard. So again, voting's open. We'd love to get more and more responses there. And if you have a chance to share your feedback, feel free to do so. Please. The next item here is the redesigning Jenkins blog post that Jan Faracek wrote for us. So this was actually published at the end of March. So it's a little bit older in terms of topics to discuss, but I want to keep highlighting this. This is a really great piece of information and story that Jan shared with us here, talking about what the challenges with redesigning Jenkins, the work that they've been doing, and what kind of plan they have as far as going forward is concerned. It's really nice. It's part one. There is going to be more to come with that. Jan's going to eventually put more blog posts together for that so that we can talk more about it and have that insight, those stories to share. So thanks to Jan for that. It's really great to see. And the UI in Jenkins has been constantly evolving over the last handful of years. It's been modernized in several different ways, lots of new features, enhancements, revamps. And for instance, Jan's also got another blog post that he's writing right now that we're planning on publishing in the next few days about the revamped pipeline graph view. So for the uninitiated or unaware, the pipeline graph view is a plugin that's available for Jenkins.io that helps visualize pipeline process and the pipeline structure. And so this has been completely revamped and updated so that it looks really nice, really inviting. Overall, just a really great visual and UI refresh for it. Again, the blog post will share that further and provide some screenshots and examples of what it'll look like. It is available now. So if you're already on I want to say it's 2.492.3 or higher. It is available. You can download it right now or update if you haven't updated already. But really great to see. Looking forward to that. And thanks again to Jan for putting that together. In regards to Google Summer of Code, so the project ranking and submission to Google was done just the other day. Thanks to Chris Stern for that. So all the rankings have been completed. At this point, we're just going to be waiting for Google to announce the accepted proposals and contributors. So that'll happen next Thursday, May 8th, around 11:30 a.m. PST, I want to say. So it'll be, but Thursday, May 8th, regardless, it'll be announced by Google, and there will be some meetings that Lissel will send out invites for once that's done. So keep an eye out for anything involving Google Summer of Code. Yeah, we're really excited and thankful for all the participants for submitting their proposals. There was over 200 submissions this year, which is a ton. That's amazing to see. And after some filtering and reviewing, over 160 were valid and reviewed by the mentors, the lead mentors, etc. So just fantastic. We're planning right now. The plan is for 5 projects. We'll see if we get all 5 projects, but right now we're working as though 5 is what we'll end up with. Google will confirm that next Thursday, what actually happens, and we'll take it from there. So thank you again to everyone for their participation, for their excitement, their energy, their efforts, for everything thus far. And once everything's announced, next phase is community bonding. So we'll see you then. The next topic's the Chinese documentation site and localization plugin. Again, Chris isn't here today to discuss anything or share any additional updates. I don't believe there are any additional updates at this time. Chris is the org admin for Google Summer of Code, so that they've been very busy with that. We also had the latest LTS release, which is a new baseline, which they were the release lead for. So lots of other things going on, but the long and short of it is the Chinese documentation site is out of date. We were talking about retiring it, but there's enough installations of the Chinese localization plugin that it the is not the right solution for it. So there's been discussion about what to do in terms of resolving that or bringing it up to date. So Chris has created an issue to track this sort of thing and get the initiative started at least, but won't start until summer at the very earliest, potentially the fall. And Chris recently adopted the Chinese doc site. So Chris, myself, and Mark are currently set for the maintainers team for that. But again, work probably will not start on that right away, and it will be something that we address later on this year. Once we have some more information and some better idea of what that'll look like, we'll be able to share that with everyone. But until then, just be aware that that's something that's coming up. The next topic's the LTS and weekly releases. So as I just shared, yesterday was our latest LTS release. That's the new baseline of 2.504. So again, the point 0.1 release, big changelog, big couple entries about the upgrade guide. Something to be aware of when it comes to this release is the complete removal of Yahoo UI from Jenkins. Very important. Our last LTS line, we disabled it by default, and it was still possible to turn it on or re-enable it. However, it's been removed at this point in time, thanks to all the plugin maintainers and the community developers for their work on this. There's a tracking sheet here if you're curious to see what other plugins still have it enabled or still have it as part of it. There's been a lot of work done. At this point, there's only a handful of plugins that have even over 800 installs that have it still as part of their configuration, but there are pull requests and tickets that have been submitted already to address that. So it's not like there's no work being done. It does rely on the maintainers to respond to that and fulfill that part of their end of the bargain in that sense. So really great to see. I think it was something like 80,000 lines of code were removed in total as a result of the work being done here. So thanks to Tim Jacome, Jan Faracek, everyone that works on the UI again for all of this work. It's really incredible and a long time coming. So thanks for that. We also had the 2.507 and 2.508 weeklies release over the last couple weeks. So those changelogs are readily available as well on the weekly release line. There are the Jenkins header redesign was one of the major enhancements recently, again, thanks to Jan and for the UI work there. If you're curious, check out the latest builds. It's included as part of those. And back in April on the 10th, we had the that was the latest Jenkins security advisory for Docker images specifically. So if you're curious, again, the security advisory, the security team always does a really great job at providing security advisories and explaining everything in a really thorough manner. So if you're curious, feel free to check those out. And then some recent work done in Jenkins.io. So thanks to Mark for fixing the Docker plugin definition example. Basil updated the Linux installation guide, keyring location. Alex Brandes updated the archetypes in the developer tutorial docs. So that's great to have. Pierre for removing an out-of-date note, which was really nice. That just makes sure we're not saying anything that's not relevant anymore. And Brigitte for their continued work on renaming the master branch to main. Yeah, it continues to be something that we want to take with great care because it is big change. It affects a lot of things, and we don't want anything broken. We're working with the infra team now to figure out what other areas might need to be updated. Thanks, Bijit, for your work on that and continuing to hang in there on that. I appreciate it, and I know the rest of the team does as well. So good stuff. Alpha Omega documentation project ideas. Again, I don't think this is going to be something that Alpha Omega selects, but the idea is that we have enhanced developer documentation, plugin tutorials that are more about maintenance and extended usage there. uh, Enhanced developer documentation overall. And this kind of goes into the idea that Antoine Nouveau had posted or proposed at a previous docs office hours. Because there's plugin developer documentation that is work in progress. We need people with the knowledge of these things to actually contribute that documentation or at least help guide that documentation process. So it's not necessarily something that I myself would be able to generate, but if we can have folks like Bruno Verachten, Darren Pope, other people that have that knowledge, uh, that's an opportunity to work on that and get their knowledge and have them share that with us so that we can increase and implement that documentation, provide more value for readers and users at large, and ultimately create a better user experience at the end of the day. So more to come with that. Hopefully that's something that we can discuss with Antoine in a future docs office hours, or if I can get to talk to him one-on-one. I'm really happy to do that and share what we can find out from there. And then the blue ocean deprecation, again, this is something that's coming that we've been discussing for a while now. It's going to happen at some point. We don't know when exactly, but when it does come time for that, we're going to make sure that the blue ocean documentation is removed accordingly. We don't want to mislead anyone with what kind of functionality is being offered. We have the pipeline graph view, which is a great alternative for pipeline visualization, especially with the recent enhancements that's happened. So there are alternatives that we'll point to, and we'll just say if there's not an alternative or replacement, that there's not an alternative or replacement. That doesn't mean it's bad. It just means that might not be useful for anyone at that point in time. If people are missing something, they can create a plugin. That's the best part. The ecosystem's endless. People can generate whatever they need. And maybe there's other plugins out there that do something that they have that haven't been maintained or up for adoption. It's a great chance for someone to adopt a plugin and bring it up to speed, bring it up to what they need it for. There are many, many plugins that someone has found use for and they've adopted because they need it for their configuration for their operations. So it's not uncommon, but we can encourage people to do that more. If we have the enhanced developer documentation, the maintaining a plugin tutorial idea, there are things that we can do to help um, increase the likelihood of people adopting plugins. So we'll see what happens there, but Blue Ocean deprecation will happen at some point. And then Mark added a Google Season of Docs note here. Mark, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, while the meeting was running, I received an email announcement sharing that one of the Google projects, so Google Summer of Code, is their longest lived and most active. It continues. They had done a different experiment using professional documentation writers, assigning them to open source projects and paying them to do so. That ran for now a total of 6 years. One of those 6 years, the Jenkins project actually qualified for and used a Google Season of Docs grant to fund Kubernetes documentation. They've announced that the experiment has ended. Google Season of Docs is no more. And the archives are available, but they won't do more than any further years. And the resources that are linked there are certainly good resources and good ways to ask, how are we doing?
Also look into that and see what we can use. So I haven't, I think Season of Docs was something that happened before I joined the project. So I didn't experience it firsthand, but
Like 4 or 5 years before. It was very early. We did it with, what's Zenob's last name? How embarrassing. I don't remember Zainab. It's listed on the website, but Zainab Abu Bakr wrote the Kubernetes documentation after doing 2 or 3 years of She Code Africa. And
Okay.
Zainab has since moved from Africa to the United Kingdom and is actively involved in software development.
I do it.
Good story for Zainab, but ultimately the idea behind the concepts for Google Season of Docs weren't as effective, I think, as Google Summer of Code is. Google Summer of Code has been much more effective in getting good things done for open source projects. That's all I have.
Is there a possibility that a real doc project could be done under Season of Code if we push the docs as code discipline enough?
Depends. So we've certainly already got docs projects proposed for Summer of Code.
But they're mostly, as I recall,
They're
most of
tooling focused. They're software
concept
development
and
focused, not content creation focused, right?
right.
And Summer of Code would be unlikely to accept a content creation project. That's I think too distant from what they're looking to do. They're looking to gather computer science graduates and people interested in the programming side more than the writing side.
Right.
Did that answer your question, Meg?
Curious. Yes.
Yeah, that's
There's other projects. Or I don't know if there's other opportunities for something like that. I'd have to do some research and see if there's any kind of content creation projects like Season of Docs, but maybe something we look into later.
yeah. In my case, the work required to do Season of Docs was enormous for us as a project, and we ultimately ended up still with our Kubernetes documentation not current because we needed persistent, ongoing maintenance of it, not just create it and step back, right? Kubernetes is just too dynamic an environment for us to say, oh, we're done. We don't have to document anymore.
Yeah. That's the problem with documentation. Sort of needs the long-term commitment to her. Software, sometimes you can take a little piece and come in and do it and be done, yeah.
Right. And that's not the case, right? That's really not the case for most of the documentation in Jenkins. We're a mature project, right? We have been around for 20 plus years and we're not going away. But that also means we've got an awful lot of writing that needs to be done all the time.
Oh, thanks for sharing that, Mark.
Excuse my blathering. That's Google Season of Docs.
Love it.
Great program has ended.
Yep. And that's okay. Some things just have to end at some point.
Right.
But that's okay. Thanks for sharing that, Mark, and putting that in there. Appreciate that. I just saw the email come through on my end as well. So yeah. But so that wraps up the agenda I had prepared for today. Are there any other topics or any other items that anyone want to talk about, discuss, throw out there before we wrap up? Alrighty then. So then, as always, the recording will be available in 24 to 48 hours. I know it's a bank holiday for our European friends, so it might be a bit delayed as compared to usual, but that's okay. It's been great as always. Thank everyone for coming. I appreciate it. Stay safe, and we'll meet again in 2 weeks. Until then, take care. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.